So congratulations on being part of a world first and a pioneering effort. It's the first time there's been a community pavilion here. This is a pavilion which is managed for and by a very large coalition of universities, NGOs, think tanks, and the CDR industry. And it's a space where CDR is being discussed and is a focus topic. Of course, CDR is also being discussed elsewhere at COP, and we're very delighted to work with those other places where CDR programming is happening. I am Chris Sherwood, the Secretary General of the Negative Emissions Platform, which is a Brussels-based industry association for the carbon removals industry. And we spend most of our time advocating for governments, including the European Union, notably, to put in place policies that promote and support the development of the carbon removals industry so that we can meet our targets. This session today is going to be about co-benefits, because we in the carbon removals community have long talked about CDR as if it was a climate activity, and we talked about it with regard to the IPCC's target or advice that we need somewhere between 5 and 10 gigatons of CDR per year by 2050, and we haven't really talked enough about how CDR relates to our societies and our economies, and I think that's the key, one of the key areas where we need to develop and improve. So, the CDR industry needs a lot of things. It needs regulation, standards, a lot more science to be done as well in many cases, and it needs regulatory frameworks, both at the kind of national and international level. We're here, of course, at a climate COP, where there's a lot of international regulation or policy being made, and this is a key place for that. So, what we would like to discuss today is how we can translate and connect policy frameworks with project implementation. So we have here a fantastic panel, starting on my left with Chris Meidel, who's the CDR lead at the Climate Champions, UN High-Level Climate Champions. Isabella Teixeira, who is a climate influencer and a former environment minister of Brazil. And Julia Secula, who is the co-founder and CFO of Terradot, a Brazilian enhanced rock weathering company. So let's start with some high level themes. My microphone is playing. So what? One of the things that we talk about often is nature-based carbon removals versus engineered or novel or technological carbon removals, and I think this is sometimes an unhelpful distinction. But I would love to get your opinion on that. What do you think of those labels, and how do you think that co-benefits can behave in that kind of context? Is it something that we should talk about instead of nature-based versus technological, or is it more of a complementary kind of description? What's the importance of the terminology here? Maybe I'll start with you, Julia.
Sure, thank you. I think from our perspective, the separation between the two is not all that useful. The reason for that is because ultimately all solutions depend on some framework of nature, and all solutions depend on some framework of technology, right? And so in our case, advanced rock weathering, and we have this helpful little graph here on the wall, we're often believed to be the ones that sit most in the middle between nature-based removal because we use rocks to remove carbon, but at the same time that can't happen unless there's a lot of science and technology, right? So I think from my perspective, even if you look at direct air capture only works if you're plugged into a clean grid, which ultimately is a function of how much access to sun or wind or hydro do you have, right? So I think they doesn't unnecessarily pit two sectors against each other or two groupings against each other when everybody needs both to function very well.
Okay, let's see how I can come into different contexts. And my first perspective that what we have been discussing the last 10 years, this is over. Okay, if we go to have the convergence of age, and we have mining age, climate age, bio age, and digital technological age. So we are discussing now the convergence of interests and visions, and how indeed we come into new concepts and new languages to drive not only solutions, but also to come into the world of not climate policies, but climate politics and power politics. Okay, what we're discussing now is exactly how the countries and private sector, the business leaders will come to frame solutions based on business and technology is absolutely key to unlock the future or to unlock the past. Keep walking, not to keep drinking turn walking, but keep walking with the past. And in my understanding, we need to move the pieces not only consider based solutions, but I prefer to approach nature-driven solutions, not only environmental science or based solutions, but nature-based solutions. No, nature-driven things, okay, if we're not able to accelerate the outcomes that we need.
Yeah, I don't like nature versus tech either. I think that's sort of, particularly around the tech side, it sort of sets up an Ewok versus Death Star kind of aesthetic that, you know, you're already kind of on a back foot. I don't like novel versus conventional either. I think we might be, what I would like is a destination ultimately for our terminology and how we think about it is more, it is an extended power of wherever you may be in terms of your industry or context that you're talking about. It's a property of nature and forest, it's a property of agriculture, it's a property of existing industries, and then we start to think about it more in those terms rather than these dual this versus that type of distinction, which I don't think really survives contact with the real world. As CDR grows, that is the direction that we're moving in. It's a many splendid thing that happens in a lot of different contexts, and it's meant to take carbon out of the air and keep it somewhere else.
Thank you. In a lot of policy discussions, there's the idea that when it comes to international trade in carbon removals in particular, that there should be some kind of priority given to permanent or long duration or technological or novel carbon removals. And this is something which is hot in the European Union's debate, for example. There's likely to be a 5% element of the EU's 90% emissions reductions target, which is for international credits. What that means, we don't exactly know, but there is certainly a school of thought that those international credits should only be permanent or long duration credits. How do you feel about that in the policy discussion? Maybe let's start with Chris on that.
I actually am really falling, if there are terms to use, I think, when you think of the virtues of different forms of carbon removal, fast and long is almost better, and we need both of those. And I think if you can combine those together, the idea of a portfolio approach, almost like a securitized, sort of blended product, where you're able to, if you're from a buyer side or even from a government side, if you mix together those things that can be fast and cheap right now, but which are improved with the addition of things that have a longer durability, that's the best way to do it. So I think we need to have this sort of blended way. If you're thinking about every year I'm going to do a certain amount of carbon removals, it shouldn't be about, am I going to select this one thing because it's really long, or this one thing because it's cheap and it's good for nature. From a buyer or adopter or an endorser or supporter side, carbon removals I think should be a box that has many things inside of it, and I think we should start to design our policy in that type of way. Not exactly sure what that's going to look like yet, but I think that that is probably the healthiest and most robust way we can do it.
I think from our perspective, integrity and permanence matters a lot. But I think permanence matters from a slightly different perspective than maybe most would assume. If you're emitting a ton of CO2 into the air, you're generating a liability that is infinite, right? And so whatever asset you have that compensates that liability combines these pieces of the market together.
For me, I think that I agree, but I would like to provoke you because when going to run solutions, this means that you need short-term perspective. And you need to convince people in markets that, for example, when you go to land restoration based on forest, I don't need to have 100 years or 200 years because it's not our timing. Okay, you need to go into business and understand probably 10 plus 20 years, a cycle of 30 years that will convince you that technology is good, that I can fix things and I can turn because technology will come into put pressure and also politics will come into put pressure. When you go in long problems like climate change, when you go coming from science policy, politics, you know that you need to drive two things, politics and also governance. And you need to go step by step. So 10 years ago, when you negotiate Paris Agreement, carbon removal was not a reality. It was not a reality. We're only driving carbon market based on the concept of Kyoto Protocol. In 1997, okay, it's really important to observe how you have this timeline and you come to provide solutions and how market will support this, but also market will demand for new transformation. And my understanding that we need to pay attention how we can combine our economic and political time together with nature time. It's not long, but we need to understand, for example, in the political world, how we can reach zero from 2050 to 2070, because India and China will fulfill the requirement 2070. So we need to understand this dynamic better because business sector, the real world is driving the solution concerning this. So for me, we need to know how to approach short term and make sure they can connect the future step by step, the change, improving things, etc., etc. So 10 years ago, as I mentioned, didn't have it. And to have a transformation perspective here that probably will change things in the next 5, 10, 15 years. And we need to play based on considering these dynamics, not more the past.
Great.
Agree?
I completely agree with you. On that, I think that one of the other, you're so right about, it's such a weird industry. It's not even an industry. What the carbon removal universe, because it was born as a scary graph. That's what I think of it. In 2018, carbon removal 1.5. It was this thing like, I guess we need to do that thing, and nobody had a sense of it, except for I guess forests do that. And it was also, well, I've heard of this DAC and BEX thing, and that got privileged only because it was easier to measure. That's really the history of it, if you look at it. And where we are right now is this extraordinarily diversified, in terms of technology, where it regionally applies, that the old frameworks that we still are looking, we think we're looking through the future, we're looking into the rearview mirror, they just don't work anymore. So we're in this critical moment where we have to just look at what is it like and where are we going, and there has to be a new vocabulary way of thinking about it. But durability absolutely has to be part of the way in which we measure what value is.
I wanted to provoke, I think that it's very important to observe that climate change is in the world. We're not discussing the future anymore. So when we come and invite the business sector to join us, the money to be a really strategic player, this money will drive the outcomes. Nobody's going to put the money to wait for 100 years. Okay? Nobody's doing it. And this is very important, how we can prove step by step good outcomes. We can have new mistakes. I also agree, okay? But I think that we need to be really pragmatic to understand the role of technology and also the role of private sector investors to drive solution and closer to adaptation perspective, because it's not only mitigation. Carbon removal will probably a bridge between new mitigation ambition and also how adaptation will come to make us less vulnerable and not only risk, less vulnerable. And this will allocate funds and technology together to make sure that we go in the right direction. It's a new game, in a new dynamics of the new rules, and I think that technology will come to make sure that, okay, this is something that we could put our coins, but we do not wait for biological time that's like 100 years. So the environmentalists must wake up, okay, if we want to drive solution to climate change.
I think this links back to what you were talking about with co-benefits, right? Which is, no, no. I think,
Which is the topic of today's.
Sorry, forgot. A couple of
no, but it links
Yeah,
back. It links back for a couple of reasons, right? So I think from our perspective with enhanced raw weathering, one of the really attractive things we found talking to stakeholders is that we can provide this fast cycle, right? So we talk to agriculture companies, mining companies, buyers, and we can provide carbon removal within a year. That matters to them because they have net zero target. It matters to them also because from a co-benefit standpoint, we're providing things in the immediate term, right? So for the farmer, we're providing things immediately in terms of agronomic benefits, pH balancing, soil health, productivity. For the mining industry, we're providing those co-benefits immediately because we're doing something with their waste material or the subproducts that they don't really have markets for. And because there's that immediate plug-in, suddenly you have different stakeholders at the table that understand there's value today and not value 100 years from now, which I think is where we're going.
yes, but look, the real world is based on costs, productivity, and the farmers must understand the value of nature because this is really an asset. It's not only climate politics, it's nature politics. Nature becoming a political player. And this ongoing agricultural sector is a reality because the guys understand very well. For example, if you have a technology, how will mix this with fertilizers and reduce my costs to increase productivity and understand the new concept of prosperity. And my second point, I understand that this carbon removal, the new dynamics that come in agriculture, especially tropical agriculture, okay, because of nature is really powerful asset. This will allow us to reframe food security because the concept that you are playing is based on the last century. The conditions are over. So we need to understand what food security and prosperity and competitiveness and trade, but really, based on today, consider the next 10 years, that this is transformative. So I think that we need to understand benefits, but we need to reframe the concepts and reframe the environment that these farmers will come as political players. If not, it's like barriers. We need green peaks, not more necessarily flexibility. So we need to bring people together, not green peaks. Green peaks something, Brazil have green peaks, the peaks of financial, okay? It's different. So it's really interesting that you can provoke people to come say, this is a technology that you must be part of to transform your business and make sure that you have a prosperity, make sure that you can domain food security. If not, it's the same, okay, and the world change. We need to change. Nature change. The world is updating. We have my feeling that you keep walking the past. We need to change things, okay? You like it?
I can't really add much to it in a way. I mean, I think, I think that the one question is whether it's co-benefit is even a useful word. Like, it's a good way to account for us of where the places where carbon removal can occur through a certain activity. But certainly if you're farmer facing or even politically facing, you're not going to lead with, oh, by the way, it takes carbon removal out of
In
it.
my understanding, we cannot have mining age at the same trajectory that we have fossil fuel age. And probably when it comes to combine with carbon removal, markets, we have really a different perspective of mining. Not only critical minerals, as an asset we use natural resource, raw material, natural resource transition really play a strategic role to come into really climate solutions.
Yes, it does work. I am going to come to the audience in just a moment to see if you have any kind of questions to ask on this first round of discussion on the question of nature-based versus technological or co-benefits in general. But I would just like to point to the fact that in discussions that I've had over the last 3 years that I've been involved in carbon removals, it's often been said that direct air capture is the CDR method that has the least co-benefits. But actually, I really think that that's a kind of very narrow-minded way of looking at it. I don't know if you have ever been in meeting rooms where there's a CO2 counter on the wall. I have, certainly in the European Commission, where I spend a lot of time in Brussels. Most meeting rooms have a CO2 counter on the wall, and shouldn't buildings be filtering CO2 out of the air for our benefit so that we can be awake in meetings and be more productive? And then, there's a...
That's where the technology came from, on submarines and in space stations. That's literally the basis of the technology, was airflow.
Right, so let's think of that as a co-benefit as well. Cleaner air in our buildings is a co-benefit of direct air capture.
Right.
Yeah. So let's pause here for a moment for questions
Do
from...
you have any solution for this? How hot this room is? Because I need a solution.
Yeah, well, you have a can of water by the side of your chair if you want to drink the sugar
No
water.
water.
But
What's
the heat, yeah.
air conditioning?
You bring up a good point, though. Real quick, I'll just say this is a co-benefit that I think is one of the most exciting ones that finally, and there's multiple that DAC can really hook onto, is data centers. The explosion of data centers, whose biggest operating cost, the biggest source of energy use, is cooling. Direct air capture, most of it runs on heat. If you can pull the heat out of a data center to run a direct air capture machine, you're solving a problem for this massive looming problem we're having on the grid, and you're pulling carbon out of the air. You know what I mean? So that's, I think you're right. You can really look at DAC now, not just as this, we got to do the DAC and just pay for it straight up. We're discovering creatively that there's a lot of different things that direct air capture even can plug in where you can lead with the benefit of it.
I think there's an interesting point there, which is the co-benefits discussion. I think there's a positive side and a negative side. The positive side is if you can meaningfully create that argument, then you have far more stakeholders at the table, and hopefully you can scale quicker. The harder side of it is that if you have more stakeholders at the table, you have to deal with more stakeholders at the table, right? And so I think there's also something that, like, between these solutions and the dance that I often see people making is one of, okay, how do we do this simply in a way that can scale really rapidly versus in a way that articulates with all the potential stakeholders that need to be on the table, right? In our case, it's ag and mining that needs to be at the table. And for us, it's a no-brainer that they need to be, but it obviously also poses a series of other challenges and opportunities in terms of how do we make sure we truly bring them into the solution.
But my generation loves that. Yes, something very important to be observed because it's really a positive perspective in my understanding. We have a moment in the world that we have this political denialism, political climate denialism, or political climate populism. Okay? It's very important to observe this. And when you go into solutions, because we shifted the needle and say, look, we're going to drive solution what's happening here. Let's see how the chair will pack things, etc., etc. But this is an open gate. It's not a window of opportunity. It's not a landscape that you can see. No, it's an open gate. You can go through to understand how we arrange people and players to drive solutions, and also to come in a really new understanding about nature. Because if we go into digital technological age, as I mentioned, we're fully dependent on natural resources, raw materials. If we go to defense industry, hard power in the world is the same. If we go to climate solutions, electrification, decarbonization, we're fully dependent on nature. So this means that we bring with the new generation will go to carbon removal market based on technological development. This means that the new generation probably will jump into this to be convinced that climate change must be solved. But not solved as my generation try to play solution based on the roots, like let's go against fossil fuels. Okay, it's a different way to approach and to tackle climate change. And this is very relevant because we have climate change into the room together another elephants. Okay, and we have new rules. So it's a new way to come also to play political role. The new generation be part of this really new momentum to drive solutions to global problems, not only transnational or regional or supranational perspectives. It's very, very important, and also for democracy, that this is not sensitive to democracy, okay? It's a different way.
A quick one, Chris, because I want to go
I just gotta, let's talk afterward because I think it really is such an important thing. We're at a moment where, as you said, the foundations of how we looked at the problem through a conventional environmental lens, which is about do no harm and a sort of a tacit modernity is bad or something like that. It's been failing for a long time, and I think it's hit a critical breaking point where it has no more mileage left in the tank. And that's why I think this COP is really important. Solutions, solutions, solutions by any means necessary to what you're trying to achieve. I think that's the new climate movement, is that, and I think we're shedding a really, really important dead weight on this.
an old skin. Right. Audience, dear audience members, do you have any kind of questions for the panelists about it? Can I borrow your microphone? About this first set of topics. We've got one.
Thank you all for joining us and very exciting panel. This question is for Chris and Isabella. Obviously, we know the importance of catalytic demand, especially to get things like CDR off the ground. On the voluntary side, there have been a lot of benefits, obviously, with buyers who recognize, hey, it's okay if we're paying a bit of a higher price today. I'm curious on the regulated market side, from your experiences, what can we actually do to incentivize governments to also realize that, hey, their purchases can be catalytic, that, hey, paying a premium today can unlock that halfway and get down the price curve? I'm curious, like, what would that actually take rather than for governments just be like, I will buy whatever is cheap and quick and work today?
Can I say one thing? I'm more interested in hearing what you have to say about it, but because it should less be starting with what do governments have to buy, okay? You guys are very well situated with the RW because you're linked to these other critical foundational parts of modern civilization and life that aren't going anywhere. It should be about how do you make this a feature of your industrial policy? How does it become a feature of agricultural policy? If you look at places like Brazil and India, massive, throw the United States in there as well, massive agricultural producers, they have a whole world and infrastructure that's designed about how do we get farmers to do this because it's good for farming. So rather than going frontally about, oh, here's another bill you gotta pay, right? If you're setting your CDR targets, it should be how is it inside of all of these other areas of policy, and it shouldn't start with the idea of what do you have to buy. It's how are you going to leverage your infrastructure, how are you going to leverage your assets and your existing policy to do a thing. That's the way it has to be. Take a look at Australia's roadmap that they just came out with today. It's interesting when you see every year, every new one that comes out, they've all learned, and this is the clearest one that talks about carbon removal in an embedded, what is our world like in Australia, and how do we use it to make carbon removal happen. It doesn't talk about our plans going to be, we're going to buy something. And I think that's an important thing, but what do you got to say about it?
Can I just quickly correct you, Chris? The Australian carbon removal roadmap was not announced today. It was announced here on this stage last week.
There you go. Actually, to be,
Yes.
yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Good to know.
It's a great report. Yeah.
Are you going next year to Australia?
I hope it's we live to that.
I hope so. I try to frame different things, different way. We don't have solutions. Okay? The first thing is that we need to recognize the diversity of situation around the world. If we need to ground things, land solutions based on reality, in a way that the farmers could understand that this is something that is very important for one generation for the next one. Farmers place here in Brazil is very curious. If we want to change things, we need to provoke the neighbor. Okay, you come to the neighbor and the farmer, look, I want this. This is the dynamics of how we change things. We need people to change things. That's why we're discussing co-benefits, prosperity, etc., etc. Public policy comes to drive solutions that are very important to access funds, finance, etc., etc. But what is critical in my understanding is that technology also connects generations. You are too young. Your father have really practiced to go food security or food production. And you have new technology in the room. You think, what is this? But you facilitate things. You connect generation, and this means that you go step by step. This really co-benefits and new languages to be transformative enough to avoid setbacks. This time is not for a pilot project. We need scalability. And we need markets to come to say, we can pay your cost and we have a price. Because demands will influence behaviors. Okay? And this is how you connect the dots. And they're going, for example, together with fertilizers, how you can mix this technology with fertilizers to reduce the cost, spread this to my farmers, and go into carbon removal and increase my productivity and be competitive. These new narratives will emerge that to connect generations. And in my understanding, if you want to avoid backlash, we need to do this. Business is part of a new vision of political understanding how we can counter tackle climate change.
Maybe just to tell a story, because you were talking about human connection. One of our farmers, his uncle, was the innovator behind no-till farming in Brazil. He was the first who brought no-till farming to Brazil.
No-till farming is when you farm without tilling the soil, right?
Yeah, you basically leave the organic material there, and that helps the soil over time. Today, Brazil has more than 60% no-till farming, something like that. Something that in the US, for example, they still consider a regenerative, sustainable practice that people are trying to implement. In Brazil, we've done that for a very long time. And his nephew, in this case, or the uncle who implemented this, he lives this legacy, and he said, I need a new legacy. And my new legacy is in net-zero weathering. And the interesting thing is, it's a farmer that, especially because the question is often asked, how do you do this in a tough political climate? The farmer is a very far-right individual. Climate or climate policy is not really something he talks about. But he comes from the first no-till farm in Brazil, and he wants to do it net-zero weathering because he cares about agronomic innovation. And so I think that's also an example of how I think often we get a little bit too caught in some of these other pieces of the story, when instead people care about innovation and people care about their farms. And that's it.
Can I just add something to what you said? I think is really, really important.
Yeah,
Is again, we're like jazz partners there or something, like go back and forth. It's great. But there was, when we started with CDR against this big chunky thing, it biases the imagination towards big chunky solutions. There must be some massive thing that can do that, right? And those things scare people away because they don't have that very dynamic you just talked about. I was for 15 years in solar before I came to CDR. I saw this happen. I'm from New York. You'd be in conservative Staten Island, Republican borough. And that had more solar than any county in the United States after a point, because it had that neighbor-to-neighbor effect where some guy would have it on his roof and he'd be like, yeah, it's saving me electricity bill. And it would spread because you could see it. And then there was a study that was done by one of the national labs that found that because they got value from it and they were proud to share it, it changed their thinking on climate change. They were like, oh, well, maybe this climate thing is real because it makes my solar system even cooler. These are these weird dynamics that nobody was really thinking about in reality, but we're seeing playing out. And I think ERW and biochar have some of those like fundamental form function things that they can have that neighbor-to-neighbor kind of spread, So anyway, just wanted to add to that.
I'm really cursed. Maybe it was just off. But I want to relate the neighbor point you both brought up to what you were asking. I think that if you think about this on a country level, countries will look at their neighbors and be jealous not of the fact that their neighbor has bought lots of CDR. they will be jealous of the fact that their neighbor has a more competitive steel industry, or a more competitive water treatment industry, or a cleaner bioenergy industry, or all these things will be the co-benefits, let's say, for a country will be the thing that drives neighbor jealousy rather than the fact that they have an inventory of CDR that they bought.
I'll tell a story based on my life. You're too young, I'm not too old, trust me, okay? But I remember when they launched the mobile, okay? And my mom gave me one. My mom gave me one, okay? But this is so unusual, okay? But okay. And I remember this, okay? When I had the first mobile, and I was here in Brazil, and my friends, they didn't have the mobiles. So I have a mobile that I could call to myself, because nobody has it, okay? After 2 years, all my friends have it. This is technologies, and today, it's impossible, okay, for my generation of generation, nobody could give up this anymore, okay? This is the process that we're coming to convince people, and probably this will change, okay?
Definitely change. It happens all the time.
All the
New
time.
stuff happens.
But we cannot commit a mistake that technology will solve everything. Technology will help us to change our behavior, our beliefs, how we can go and to build development, prosperity, competitiveness, consider climate change or global crisis or planetary crisis, and this will not build up based on fear or tragedy. This will build up in our capacity to solve problems and to come together, okay? So don't trust people that try to convince you based on fear. Never, okay, never. Be able to go, to have your mistakes and go right, but understand that you can do better than you are doing today. And this is the password of technology like the one that facilitates, bring another adults into the room to discuss things, consider the future, but to have the present really a context that you can do better than you are doing today.
And don't be afraid to be excited about these things. That's part of the dead weight in the skin that we have to shed. It's just the default fear, scarcity, we're screwed. Nobody responds to that. It's no longer, that exhausts
And it's
us.
so boring, come on. Come on, it's so boring. Some debates here, God, okay? I look at God, it's like the guy saying that's still young, it's not so old, okay? And I look, come on, change it, come on. Invite the new guy, the new generation, come, ask that, discuss, you have the floor. Look at this, go ahead. No, we have the market reserve, carbon loss, it's so boring, you know?
I love the natural back and forth that's happening on the stage, but I also want to give the audience another chance to ask a question.
Chris, I do have to run to another event.
Okay, maybe I'll let you talk.
This was great. My favorite conversation in the cup.
Absolutely, yes, let's get talking.
All right, thanks, Chris. Bye-bye. Yeah, give him a warm round, and good luck for your next discussions. I'll move closer over here, and maybe bring my laptop as well. Any questions from the audience? Yes, you.
Thank you for the panel. My question is actually to you, Chris. You mentioned that CDR can help steel industries. Can you just elaborate a little bit how, from my understanding?
Hello? Yes. Yes. So my understanding of this is nascent, but I know that steel production produces slag, and that slag is typically a material which absorbs CO2 from the air. And so instead of leaving it on a big pile or creating a hill out of it, you could actually use it to if you treat it properly and manage it and spread it in the right way, and as long as it's not harming the environment, you can actually use that to absorb CO2 from the atmosphere, mineralize CO2 directly into the slag. That's potentially better for the environment, and it's also potentially something that gives the steel industry a source of revenue, because they then get a carbon removal credit, which, or if it's not a removal, it may be counted as an emissions reduction ultimately, but that potentially makes it economically more interesting to do steel production. And it's the same thing with food, construction, paper, chemicals, energy production, waste management, water treatment, dozens and dozens of industries. Another question? No?
Thank you very much for an interesting talk so far. I was wondering whether you might want to address the claim on or the title of the talk a little bit more deeply, which is building co-benefits into the Paris Agreement. So far you've discussed around some co-benefits, but not so much the actual integration of the two.
Yeah, that was actually what I wanted us to dive into next. And I'm sorry that we've lost Chris Meidel before we were able to do that. But why don't we just take that prompt from the audience and dive into that. Maybe I'll start with you, Julia. How do you feel about taking the co-benefits that are generated by your enhanced rock weathering activity and somehow integrating them into an Article 6 framework? Do you think that's useful, desirable, possible?
So I think there's a couple elements here. One is when we think about Article 6, and especially Article 6.4, the connection we see, and this will make more sense why it's co-benefits related, is you already have international markets for trade of commodities, right? So corn, soy, sugarcane, ethanol, all of these things. What is the version, so the question then becomes, what is the version of an Article 6 transaction that allows you to couple this existing infrastructure for international trade together with carbon removal, right? And in so doing, you're actually supporting both, because the co-benefits we have from enhanced rock weathering are increased resilience of the soils, increased productivity, which have to do with adaptation, but also have to do with volumes of international trade. And how can you bring those pieces together in a carbon removal context, right? So from our perspective, I think you can't separate out the two because they meaningfully, one shapes the other.
But can you in Article 6.4 context, can one country buy the co-benefits that the other has achieved for its farmers?
Not today in the way that it's structured. Today that happens outside of the context of carbon removal and happens in the context of international trade, right? So there's a lack of consistency there, or maybe an opportunity to combine the two.
Or nationally, the countries will come to reframe things considering how we come outside 6.4 and consolidate markets that address solutions bilaterally. We cannot forget that climate change, we are playing on climate change under an FCCC umbrella, but outside also. If you go into like market blocks, like Asian, like BRICS Plus, like G20, the debate is different concerning climate solutions. So we are going to really climate finance and climate economy. And the countries, for example, like Brazil, that we're going to private lands and the guys must preserve nature vegetation from 20% to 80% of private lands. We can remunerate, we can use this and we move it and really make sure that we can value capture natural capital together with the carbon removal. And this is a new way to frame climate financial access funds. And this is happening today in Brazil, okay? We try to combine natural capital value plus carbon value. This is the challenge, and of course that the Paris Agreement doesn't host this yet, but will go with solution and probably bring adaptation and mitigation together with probably will emerge. But what is very important that we bring agriculture or land use into the core of climate solutions, considering that the key emissions come from energy sector. Okay, so we cannot forget how we can bring the countries together because of this. I think that's really a powerful way to approach solutions and to combine core benefits. But the new narratives that will emerge from climate action probably will change some tools, or probably in the future we have to add to add an annex to Paris Agreement to facilitate the demand of markets that will emerge because of technology and new combinations of solutions.
Yes, that works. Right, so today I think you both said that Article 6 doesn't really cater for trade in co-benefits. Could co-benefits impact the price of the carbon removal activity that then gets traded on Article 6?
Now we're just brainstorming. From a pricing and market perspective, I actually don't think it makes sense to confuse the two because the markets for both are very different. The carbon removal market, I think, is one, and today there's a clear buyer. I think those that are looking, in our case, to buy the commodity or buy a sustainable steel product, was asking about, are very different, right? And so I think the mechanism needs to be one around how do you enable these different interests and stakeholders to participate, rather than trying to, in addition to, finding a unified market for all of these solutions here on the wall, and then in addition to this, trying to add a second vertical, which is the co-benefits that all of them produce. I think from my perspective, I think that will make the market more complex and not more simple. And I think simplicity is important.
So, is there a future that you're looking towards, one where it's the CO2 accounting that is actually the thing that is priced and purchased and traded in an Article 6 framework, but the co-benefits are nevertheless part of why you do the activity locally, and so they are like a benefit to the host country that doesn't get bought and sold, but is just a benefit that the host country keeps. Is that how you see it?
Well, the benefit does get sold in a market like Brazil, where it's an export economy, right? So if I'm creating a higher ethanol yield that gets exported to Japan, then that is a direct benefit to the country, right? I think the difference here is really one around the suggestion I would have on co-benefits if someone from the Article 6 panel was now inviting me to opine on what they're negotiating right now, is making sure that Article 6 transactions are made with solutions that have co-benefits, because not all of them do, right? And maybe that's the best way that you can actually separate out resilience and other benefits for the country and focus on those solutions alone.
Isabella?
Yes, I agree, but I have doubts. Okay, because when you go into climate solutions, and what's happening here is not only based on public policy and governance or state members, we invite other adults to go. And this means that we can not only technologies, but new business model to drive solutions because climate change is happening. So the short term, the next 10 years, probably will requalify what we have since Article 6. And also because we have a new political dynamics in the world. When you frame this in Paris Agreement, Brazil was the 10 key countries that drive, that really shape Paris Agreement and frame things. We have an understanding about how the countries will come together and to have Article 6.2, 6.4, how we can manage this, etc., etc., etc. Today, I think that really things change. Okay, and when you bring the solutions plus technology and costs, with these dynamics that we have like-minded arrangements, like-minded blocks, we're not coming in consensus. The impact the next 10 years will be so huge, okay, because you need to value things, you need to remunerate things, and you probably will reframe the rules to facilitate, to really achieve outcomes that avoid setbacks. It's not more pilot projects, small scale. Okay, we're going to the big economies. This is what, if you invite markets to be into the room, okay, we need really the big players in the room to drive solutions and come really a new way to promote carbon benefits. If you're able to remunerate this, or if you can exchange, we have some other aspects that you have to be very careful. For example, how you approach justice of fair development, inclusive development, etc., to avoid, as what's happened, probably happening today when you go to natural resource and you have the new extractivism, the colonialism when you go to. We need to understand better the dynamics emerging now and make sure that we can discuss what we are asking here. Okay? And discuss how can be fair or not. Okay? The real world of trade and climate that's emerging here is based on barriers now and protectionism and green protectionism. And the other side, you have the green wishing of people. Be pragmatic, okay? If you want to drive solution, bring the market to the business to the room with scale.
Maybe just to add another thought here as a point to the audience, which is the co-benefits and carbon removal story, especially in historic weathering, has some weird dynamics, which is in some cases the carbon removal, even if you're selling at $300, $400 a ton, is a portion of the economic value you're generating in terms of co-benefits, right? So we saw this in the case of cacao. Cacao had super high prices, and if you're looking at the increase in yields of cacao, then suddenly your agronomic benefit is significantly more valuable than your carbon benefit. And the way that today we think about carbon markets has this concept of additionality, right? And you're almost in this Goldilocks dance where you're like, you want co-benefits, but you don't want so many co-benefits that you can't prove additionality, and vice versa. And there's a piece here on additionality when we talk about co-benefits that I don't think people are spending enough time thinking about, because it ultimately means if you have a profitable business doing ERW on cacao, then suddenly your carbon credit is not worth it anymore.
Can you talk us through that in a little bit more detail, and then I'll go to the audience again.
Sure. So the simple concept is, right, that if you're building a carbon project and looking to generate carbon credits, you have to prove that without the financing from carbon removal, that project would not exist. That's the simple concept of additionality. Now, if you're, in the case of cacao, on a very high value crop that over the last couple of years has had very, very high prices, if you're applying ERW, you're generating 2, 3, 4 times the value in economic value from the cacao that's growing additionally than your carbon credit. And so suddenly it's very hard for you to justify that that project would not exist without the carbon removal, because you're actually raking it in on the cacao front. And these dynamics, I think, are first a product of not actually understanding full systems, right? But second, I think because co-benefits are often seen as the side thing, when actually for a lot of these solutions, co-benefits is the thing that allows you to scale. In our case, if we're not providing agronomic benefit to farmers, it doesn't work. And that's a good thing. And yet, if we were providing so much agronomic benefit that it would make sense for them to do it themselves, the market dies. So it's kind of a weird dynamic.
Okay, is
Just a formal comment. Probably we need to, when we go to implement action and consider carbon removal market, we probably will have additional pressure that will emerge, exactly based on additionality. Okay, additionality probably will be rebuilt, the understanding of additionality if we want to really move the piece ahead. Probably this will happen, but let's wait 3 cups or 4 cups.
yeah, because it seems to me like you're kind of pointing to the need to review the concept of initiality from the beginning and what it's based on. Maybe there's a temporal element there as well. I don't know. But let's Beatrice, if we can move to the audience question. Oh, he's got the microphone already. Yeah. So.
Somebody else? I've already talked. Do you want to?
to the discussion planetary boundaries. Because one of the points for me is that a lot of times climate is always a climate, and then one could benefit, another could benefit. But if you look at the planetary boundaries, there's so many other problems that is also going on. And I think if you could address as one, it might help the solutions go forward. What is your perspective?
I have a startup perspective on this, which is focus, focus, focus. And I think the planetary boundaries are super important. From a company perspective, if I try to imagine now selling a product that now has some differentiation because of its impact on planetary boundaries, in our case, water, right? Water security is one of the things that we know that enhanced rock weathering has a positive impact on. I think it would just be really, really tough from like a business actually trying to make it useful perspective.
I think that I should provoke you, okay? Planetary boundaries is something that we have been discussing the last 20 years, and tipping point in the next 40 years. Okay? And now we have 1.5 overshooting, and we need to review mitigation strategy if we want to short the overshooting. It's like we have a loop, supposed to be back, but nobody knows, or how we improve our ambition, okay, to cut emissions and to reduce the impact in the future that I'm buying now. When you go how this combination of planetary boundaries, that is not only climate is the trigger, but we have, for example, how the interspecies connect themselves, and the price of nature is so high, and we are driving things based on the human time. And if we're on the sapiens species, we don't go to discuss the real perspective of how nature is changing. And you have tipping points into the room. So tell me how you could frame to drive really what we're discussing here. Planetary boundaries plus tipping points plus 1.5 for overshooting. This is the real, if this is real, we need to set the questions for science to say, answer this in a way that I can frame really strategic decision process that was taken, a decision that was taken. So I'm not sure yet how science will jump into this new context of climate action. Okay, because we are driving solutions that impact will be in the future, but we have climate change impact in short term. And this will be absolutely disruptive, and that's why we have trade, insurance, and other players into the room discussing climate risks. So this will be a big challenge in my understanding if science will become a political player and be co-responsible for the scenarios that we need to provide solutions. It's not clear for me, and my friends scientists, they not able to answer this.
Thanks. I think you had a question as well.
Thank you. So just to quickly come back to the additionality point of view, I kind of agree with it, but at the same time, I think you also have to think about additionality from how quick you're able to make that industry scale. So if you take away the carbon credit and it happens to be very carbon negative, then that industry won't scale as quick, even though it's having the effects you want. So I think I'd still rather be on that side. I'm a co-founder of a company called Mash Makes, and we do pyrolysis. We take second generation biomass, we produce a biofuel for the maritime sector, and in a way our byproduct is the biochar for carbon removal. It's full of different co-benefits. It's really interesting to compare it against a company like Charm Technologies, who does biofuel burying, because intuitively that seems nuts. If you can make a product that can be used in a ship, why not use it in a ship and displace fossil fuel? And yet we wouldn't be able to get any carbon removal credits for that. Whereas the other company just buries into the ground, makes actually really good money on high-priced carbon removals. So there seems, it might be correct, sometimes there are unintuitive results in these areas, but there seems to be something a little bit broken about the market with how those co-benefits are made.
But isn't that like so the Charm model, as I understand it, and just to be transparent, Charm is a member of the negative emissions platform,
And they're very good.
and you're not yet a member of the negative emissions platform. But my understanding is that the economic model behind that is pure, as you said, is right. It's purely CDR credits, and the farmers share that revenue with the project developer. But in your model, then presumably there is revenue that you're generating from the fuel. So isn't that okay? I mean, you're making revenues that they're not. So presumably there's the economic model is different, but probably just as viable, no? Or
Yeah, I think that's a very true way to look at it. But it also seems a little bit, it still seems unintuitive on the kind of value creation level. And then if you go a little bit further, say now we're generating revenue from the biofuel, well, should we not get carbon credits from the biochar? And if we didn't, well then it would probably make more sense to burn the biochar than actually take the cost